There is a happy land far, far away, where we get bread and scrape 3 times a day. Bread and butter we never see, no sugar in our tea, while we are gradually starving away.
That happy land was right here at the Moore River Aboriginal Settlement, or rather where it once was, nearly 40 years ago. Hello, I'm Bill Bunbury. Today, this place is an Aboriginal farm community set along a green river valley. From here, I can see the tree-lined banks of the Moore River, and behind me, a few ruined buildings and a chapel. That's almost all that remains of the original settlement here near Magumba, the nearest railway stop on the line north from Perth, 150 kilometres away. This is a place so isolated you'd hardly know it existed. Most people still don't. But many Aboriginal people have never forgotten it. Being sent to Moore River meant going to a government settlement, to be out of sight and out of mind.
It looked like if they didn't want them to mingle with the white people. They got them in one little heap. When a family came here, they got far as the compound where we are sitting now. They got far as the compound, and that was like, to me, it was like a drafting yard. The lambs were kept here, and the mum and dads were sent down to the camp.
Well, they collected them in truckloads. I have no idea why they ever done it. I couldn't say from that day to this. When I arrived at the...
This period told me Moore River was originally meant to be a training centre.
For a few years it worked very well. Then we had the depression of the 30s, in which it really deteriorated because finance was cut back. In fact, I think you could keep an Aboriginal person in Moore River for 2 and 6 per week, where they used to pay 6 shillings a week to keep a prisoner in Fremantle prison. So not much money was spent in Moore River at the time. And of course then Moore River deteriorated to such an extent that it was a home for murderers, thieves and God knows what, people who had been speared who came in there and old people who came there to die. It became a clearinghouse for Aboriginal people. A clearinghouse in the sense that they were sent there to just to stay there and decay away in mind, body and soul.
Moore River was only one of several government settlements in Western Australia at this time. All of them came under the control of A.O. Neville, Chief Protector of Aborigines, a man many of them still remember. Margaret Morgan, whose father ran a mission at Mount Margaret in the eastern goldfields, sums up Neville's policy.
His whole idea was to get people separated from the tribal conditions so that they would merge and absorb in the white population. We could forget that we ever had an Aboriginal problem. But I think that a lot of white people went along with it because it was kind of doing something about the problem, as they called it, you know.
Well, I think they wanted to do away with the Aboriginal people. We had a native protector at the time. His name Mr. Neville. Oh, he was a very hard man and he's very prejudiced to the Aboriginal people. You know, he'd go up to Mount Margaret and to Labour and all that area, catching Afghans and sending them down to Magumba. He wanted the Afghans to go down to be integrated as the white, and then he wanted the black Aboriginal to die out. He said, in time to come, they got to die out sooner or later. He was a very hard man.
It seems to me, from the prevailing attitude of those days, they didn't see Aboriginal people as human beings. They saw them as, well, the lowest of the social scale and almost feelingless. It was that kind of an attitude. So I think you can't altogether say Mr. Neville was that on his own. I think he mirrored the times.
A.O. Neville controlled Aboriginal affairs from 1915 to 1940, operating under state laws which regulated their education, employment, and even marriage and freedom of movement. One of Neville's successors, Stanley Middleton, closed down Moore River in 1951, handing it over to the Methodist Overseas Mission. Middleton recalls his first visit here in 1948.
I could smell it half a mile away before I got there. The very strong
almost overpowering smell of creosote mixed with human odours and so on. I was almost shocked by the attitude of the adult inmates. These people just sat there absolutely silent and just stared. It affected me rather profoundly because it was so obvious that they were a people who were psychologically very disturbed. As far as the government was concerned, it was a convenient dumping ground for unwanted natives. Take Northam as an example, one of the nearest large towns. If the chairman of the road board, as it was then, felt there were too many natives there than were required for their purposes, like the off-season between harvesting and seeding and that sort of thing, they would get the police. They didn't have to get the department's approval. The police would simply round them up and take them into Moore River, out of sight, out of mind.
It used to bring a lot of people away from where they lived. There was girls there from Derby, even to old women. They used to bring them down for some unknown reason. I don't know why. No one's ever said it.
Now, this spread right through to the north. Raids used to be made on pastoral properties in the Pilbara, and half-caste children were just scooped up and taken away, and their parents would never see them again.
The Aboriginal affairs used to come around north scouting for little kids to take them away from their parents. When they knew they were around, my mother and whoever else were there, they used to make sandwiches up and give it to us, and we'd have to stay in the quarters all day to the bed and hide ourselves, you know, so that they wouldn't take us away.
All Aboriginal people were wards of the state, and that was the law. A magistrate only had to sign a piece of paper, and the people could be just say, well, OK, you're going to Moore River, and they would be sent so accordingly, and hundreds were uprooted like us and sent there.
They were still picking people in from the north and the south. That was in the 40s. Wangais, Wanmullahs, Yamajis, you name them. They brought them in from all over. They lined them up between the office and the boys' dormitory. Now, a lot of these fellas couldn't talk English, and the superintendent would have a book in his hand, and he'd have the black tracker standing alongside of him that didn't understand reading or write or even couldn't count. And they walk along the line, they say to the bloke, what's your name? One fellow, he can't talk, he'll say, I don't know his name. They'll put him down Friday. What about this? Oh, put him down 4-day Friday. The second boss will be standing with the superintendent, and he'll be writing it down. Put him down 40. What's this fellow name? Oh, he can't talk. Or he says something in Australian language, that's Aboriginal language. They'll call him Wilbur. Next one, put him down 50. Next one and so on. So Horseshoe Tommy, Penny, or Billy Can Bill.
Well, I always have very strong, vivid memories of an old man who was called Skipper. Of course, being a boy of 14, anybody who had a long white beard was old. But looking back, I think he would have probably been about 50 years of age. His wife was blind, an enormously big woman. Her name was Nora. She was completely blind, and he was, I would have said, 80% blind, and they lived together. And one of the most vivid experiences of my life was to sit down with those two at night and hear those two sing. I have never heard anything in my life since or before that could rival those two in power of voice. Everybody in the whole community used to stop when those two used to sing. Their Aboriginal songs were at the top of their voice, the power and the range and the tremolo. It was just absolutely amazing. It was just marvellous. They were singing about their country, which they knew they were never going to see again.
But some Aborigines did make it back to their own country from here. Margaret Morgan and Reggie Johnston, together with Alice Bassett, recall the escape of 15 people in 1926. They'd been rounded up by the police in Laverton to be sent to Magumba, 1,000 kilometres away. Margaret Morgan's father had gone down to the police station to find out what had happened to them.
He didn't know then. All he saw was that when he went down to the train, he saw this cattle truck with the little notice outside of the truck, 15 niggers from Magumba.
They made a big crate on the truck, and they piled these poor old people, you know, and there was a blind man there, and one had a broken leg. There were women and children, and other men as well, and they were all brought to Magumba. They were very shy, couldn't speak English, some of them. They just lived on the compound. And every now and again they'd move camp, just kept on moving camp. And one night they made the escape and went back home.
But they had to get over the river, and they got over it by looking at a big tree and using it as a bridge. and dropping on the other side. Now they had old people with them, and they had a blind man with them. And this Wawager, he was a strong young fellow, they tell me, and he helped get these old and blind across.
They escaped from Magamba, but they soon found their way back. They was in fear when they was travelling. They couldn't light a fire because they're frightened because the police will follow them up and put them in jail.
The trackers, they were told to get after them and look for them, but not one of them were game because they didn't belong to that tribe and would have been killed themselves.
In the morning they woke up and they looked to see where they were going to go, and they looked at the sun and they worked out where they reckoned home was.
They could read the star, they could find the star, the Seven Sisters, you know, that up north. So they make straight and follow the Seven Sisters every day.
And on the way, they left an old man who knew he was going to peter out, so they left him with his fire. They never saw him again. The blind one, he was holding them up, so they just left him in a paddock. And that's the most incredible story of all, because they said he sat in the paddock and he yelled for all he was worth. And a farmer heard him, took him home to Yalgoo, of all places, which is further north. And when he got there, sent a message around that he had this old man, and did anyone know who he belonged to?
And found out, they took him to Mount Magnet then, and he found out his sister was there. So his sister had to walk all the way from Magnet through Sandstone. About 800 kilometres he had to walk.
They had a long wanna, they call it. That's a big long fellow home.
Oh, they was glad when they went back, but some of their old people died when they returned. But many of them Afghans never returned.
Perhaps those most affected by the policy which gave rise to Moore River were children.
The children, particularly, were sent there for so-called education and protection.
Well, that was the promise. See, Mr. and Mrs. Campbell said, we'll take the kids down, educate them, and we'll bring them back home. But we never ever got back.
That was Alice Bassett, one of many children sent here in the 1920s. Alice came from the northwest, the child of a European father and an Aboriginal mother. Her parents separated, and Alice was taken into care by neighbours, the Campbells, pastoralists about to retire south. They'd told Alice's father they would take her with them and ensure her education. So with two other girls, Alice came down by sea. Her final destination, the Moore River settlement.
The boat's got a balcony, or whatever you call it. We used to sit out there. They never took us into the dining room. We sat out there and warbling and the water swaying, you know, and the food would just come up. We'd feed the fish. And of course we used to talk in our own lingo those times. And we'd sit there and we'd cry for home. We'd say, oh, if we could only just go back home and be with our mother. You know, it ought to just be heartbreaking. My father, he had a station. When he knew I was coming down, he sold his property and came down with me thinking that he'd be with me all the time, you know. But he never, they barred him from seeing me. He went back, I suppose, a very disappointed and a broken-hearted man, you know, because he loved me and I loved him too. So in 1925 we went to Magamba, three of us kids. The train was a bit late that night, and when we got to Magamba we were just taken into the dormitory, knowing nobody, everybody else was in bed, and we woke up in the morning to find little black faces all over the place, you know. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. I was so worried and upset.
Cyclone beds, no sheets of course, blankets, bug-ridden. When anybody special was coming to the settlement, we had a stock of sheets which were put on the beds especially, so that if anybody wanted to go into the dormitories and have a look, they got the impression that the children always had sheets on their beds. The compound was lined with pine trees or fir trees, and when anybody special was coming, they were whitewashed all the way up the trunks. The camp people were told to tidy up, get the rubbish out of the way, so that when anybody came, it gave the impression that the place was reasonably clean.
In Moore River now settlement, there was the main compound, and then you'd go further down the river to the camps. You'd have camps set up down there. You'd have two people picked out of that large number of people down there. Who would be head cook. That would be a man and wife. The food would be taken down there to be cooked. It'd be breakfast, dinner and supper. Each time the meals were ready, The old tin would be rattled or the iron would be hammered at. Everybody'd come running out of their camps with their billy cans and pots to get a bit of soup and things.
There is a happy land far, far away, where we get bread and scrape 3 times a day. Bread and butter we never see, no sugar in our tea, while we are gradually starving away. That's the song. We used to sing it often, especially when we were feeling hungry.
See, we only had that bread and scrape. We call it bread and scrape. There are 2 girls there, one dipping the bread in the fat, and the other one scraping it off to make it last.
All I went up is the 3rd grade, and then I had to go out and work.
Alice Bassett, who'd been promised an education down south. How did that work out in practice?
They had to make clothes for the Forest River Mission, and they needed girls, so they took me out of school. It took about 4 of us out of school, and took us down to the sewing room, and all the girls had machines and sewing, you know. We had to get these clothes done. And you know what we used to get paid every Saturday morning? A bar of chocolates. No money, we never saw money. They didn't want to give us a real education. One day he said, as long as they can count money and write their name is all they need. What sort of an education is that?
The teachers were not education department teachers. They were not trained teachers. We had 2 teachers most of the time, about 150 children. The highest grade that they would have achieved would have been grade 4. I felt that a lot of the children there and a lot of the people had so much good in them and so much could have been done if they were given the right opportunities.
What caused me to be so bitter about it all? Because when I came down south, we were under the impression to go down and go to school, then go back home. But when we were shoved into the mission, well, that was the end of everything, you know. I just give up all hope.
There was no incentive whatsoever for employment or doing anything. In fact, it was said to me by some people who came and looked at the settlement, what should be written across this place is abandon hope, all ye who enter here.
A lot of the girls used to want to get away from there. Some of them jumped the train, go to Perth. They used to fetch them back and lock them up, but they'd do it again. They just were the ones that couldn't settle or just wanted to get out and see what life was all about, I suppose.
Well, if the girls ran away, they were tracked by the trackers, apprehended and brought back again and locked up in a place we called the Boob, which was a small galvanised iron building with no proper facilities.
One of the buildings was introduced to me as being, quote, the Boob. I knew, because I'm a country Queenslander, and I knew what was meant by Boob, and it's prison. I said, what have you got this for? I said, we locked them up. I said, why? Oh, he said, if they do anything wrong, you know, fight or doing anything they shouldn't, we put them in here for the night. But I said, well, on what authority? He said, I'm the superintendent. They went far as tarring and feathering a bloke here, and he got it through talking to girls, and I think he pinked cigarettes. They tarred and feathered him, the superintendent. He had to run down all the way down there with no clothes down to the bottom, and they put hot water on to get the tar off him.
The way that these places were conducted would depend very largely on the characters and the attitudes of the white staff. Not all of these were the ideal people to have in charge of institutions of that nature.
Well, we would get rejects from the police force, people who'd retired from the police force. The superintendent who was there when I was there was a Boer War veteran, very militaristic in his style, very much suited for Moore River settlement. I think the type of person who would have been suitable to Hitler in Nazi Germany.
It was a place that was detested by the inmates and very sloppily maintained by the staff. I felt that I could in no way hold myself responsible for the maintenance of a place like that.
Stanley Middleton was as good as his word. He closed down Moore River in August 1951. It was the end of an era and the beginning of a new policy towards Aboriginal Australians. But Moore River and other places like this one have made their mark on those who'd already been through them.
It made us very weak, and it made a lot of us very strong. The effect of keeping full-blood people down had failed, and all of a sudden the half-caste population was there on their doorstep, and most of them were related to them, and therefore they didn't know how to handle it.
They just didn't want half-castes to be mixed up with the full-bloods. And they wanted to get them away on that account, I think. I used to love my father, and he was white, you know, but I loved my mother just the same. They were just equal. There was no difference between them. They were both human beings.
They were a very fine race of people. They regarded Moore River as a punishment. They just had no opportunity at all. Once they were at Magumba, well, as I've said before, they were just out of sight and out of mind.
Sister Eileen, with the last word on Moore River Aboriginal settlement. My special thanks also to Bruce McClarty, Robert Brofo, Ned Mippy, Hazel Anderson, Anna Haybick, and many others who've helped us to tell the story of this place. Production Jenny Mason, Martin Roth and Bill Napier. I'm Bill Bunbury. Goodbye.